Hello and welcome to Learning Spanish a lo Boricua. My name's Carrie, and in today's episode, I'm going to be teaching a clasecita about the conversation in the previous episode. So it might be helpful for you to refresh, re-listen to the previous episodes so that as I'm going through the vocab that was used, giving some examples of grammar, talking about some things with pronunciation, you have a memory of where it's coming from. I know personally, I learned a ton from listening to podcasts in Spanish. Not about learning Spanish, but listening to podcasts in Spanish, kind of like the conversation that Alfredo and I had in the episode before. And I retained so much more because I could remember what the episode was about, who it was that was being interviewed, what they were sharing about their story, something impactful that happened to them that stuck with me, and therefore the language used, some of the phrases, the examples stuck with me much more because it had a memory attached to it. So go ahead and re-listen if you need to episode 1, and then we'll get into it today. I highly recommend that you view today's episode on YouTube. If you're in the podcast format right now, the link to view this episode on YouTube is right in the podcast description. Because I am going to be going through vocab and grammar examples, it's going to help you a lot to have a visual piece to this. All right, so let's jump into it. As I mentioned, we're going to be going over vocab, a couple things pronunciation-wise that you'll hear in this episode, as well as grammar. And I'm going to be breaking down the three or four examples of grammar that I'm pulling out from the episode as at a beginner intermediate level, an upper intermediate level, and an advanced example of grammar here. Now, I will not be going in depth about all of the terms or the tenses that I mentioned in this episode. If I were to do that, the episode would be 3 hours long, and you don't want that, and neither do I. So, shameless plug, if you need more information, if you feel like before I can be looking at examples of the imperfect tense, I need to know what the heck the imperfect tense is. Well, in my community here, which is now hosted on Kajabi community, it was formerly Vibely, but has been acquired by Kajabi, which is a very well-known, reputable platform for courses, for teachers. You'll see that I have a resource section in my community with recorded live classes, everything from how to get started in the language, so super beginners would do well to check out here. You'll see in this Get Started section that I'm sharing right now on the screen. There's also a live class that I gave on Grammar 101. So if you're feeling like just wrapping your head around conjugation, what the heck does that mean? If you're a second generation and you have had more of a native speaker type of interaction with the language, but need to fill in gaps of grammar, then this might be a great place for you to get started. Refamiliarize yourself with the terms so that as you're getting into different grammar jargon, it's less intimidating. This is the intro to being able to feel a little bit more confident with some of those grammar terms. Right, Grammar 101 and more. We've got present tense, pronunciation tips, ser and estar, gustar and encantar, reflexive verbs, masculine and feminine, direct and indirect objects. If you're saying, I don't know what the heck these things are, that's why there's a class on them. I would have never known what a direct and indirect object was if I didn't decide I wanted to be bilingual. Not things that we have to think about in our native language. So come in here, check out the resources that I have available. I have classes that explain, well, what the heck is this and how the heck to use it. All right, so if you feel like you need a couple steps before with some of the things I'm going over grammatically, please go ahead and check out my community, Spanish with Carrie on Kajabi Communities. The link is also in the podcast description or in the YouTube description as well. Without further ado, let's start with our vocab. We started off this conversation talking about our weekend, hablando del fin de semana, hablando being speaking or talking. After the verb hablar, you can either use sobre or de to imply to speak about, to talk about. Okay, hablar de, hablar sobre, both imply to talk or to speak about. So we've got here, I'm using del, hablando del fin de semana, speaking about the weekend, talking about the weekend. The first thing that came up, you would have heard me say right in the beginning, was the word chilling. And I wanted to go over that because, yes, in Puerto Rico, you can use Spanglish. A lot of Spanglish is used, and people have all sorts of opinions about the use of Spanglish in Puerto Rico. But considering they've been under colonizer rule for over 100 years, an English-speaking country, it's quite natural that English has slipped into the language. Chilling is something that you can use exactly as you would use it in English. Here's my opinion about Spanglish in Puerto Rico. If you want to be bilingual, to me, bilingual meant being able to be my authentic self in the language, and it meant being able to speak about just about anything. I wanted to be at a near native speaker level. That requires you to learn thousands of words. That's not an exaggeration. That has been studied. And of course, it depends on the language, et cetera, and kind of how you break down words and word families. But they estimate that a native speaker would have somewhere around 30,000 words in their vocab. At a higher level of education, that might turn into 60,000 words. So when you literally have tens of thousands of words to learn, the fact that you can use some from your native language should be good freaking news, okay? Chilling. You can use it just like that. I would recommend that you don't pronounce the words that are used in Spanglish here are not pronounced like you would pronounce them in English. It's a little bit as you would pronounce that same word in Spanish. So in order to not break your flow and your tone and your accent, go ahead and pronounce them like chilling, like chilling rather than chillin'. Okay, that needs to have that I sound that it would be in Spanish. Okay, Alfredo mentioned that he had a par de palitos o tragos, okay? That is a way of saying a few drinks. Par, it would be implying a few, a couple, a pair. Think of it like that. Par de palitos and tragos. Let's break down the next two words that he used. Un paro in this context, talking about having some, means a drink, but paro has a couple other meanings in here on the island. Un paro can also be like a hit, a success, saying that something is good. For example, before Bad Bunny put out his album Un Verano Sin Ti, he put out a tweet that basically looked like the track list, I think there's almost 20 some songs on that CD, on that album. And he had next to each number, palo, 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 as in hit, a banger, that we might say, with about a song, a success. The idea being it's something that's very good. Okay, un palo, a hit. Somebody might say to you, eso un palo, and that would be like saying it's a hit. Eso un palo, a success. Okay, un palo can also be a stick, right? But when you're using it in the context, I'm also going to be sort of alternating here between the PowerPoint and my Word document so you can see some examples. When you're using it with darse, so me di un palo, or nos dimos unos palitos, okay, just putting the diminutive on there, making it a couple drinks or a few or a little drink. And then you'll know and get that context with the verb darse reflexively that you're implying you're having a drink. This is the common verb to use to say I had. Me di un palo, I had a drink. Me di una cerveza, I had a couple beers. Me di una cerveza, nos dimos unas cervezas, etc., etc. I'm not here to explain to you verb conjugations in the preterite tense. That's what you're seeing right here. If you need to, that's something you can find on my in my Spanish resource library. All right, so we got un palo, meaning a drink. The general word for a drink could mean a hit or a success or a stick, depending on the context. And finally, we've got tragos. So tragos are mixed drinks. And in other countries, you might hear this as a shot. I think that's how I originally learned it. But tragos in Puerto Rico means a mixed drink, a cocktail. Okay, and palo is just the general word for a drink. All right, I mentioned that I just wanted to vacilar. I had some big plans for myself that Saturday morning. I had just spent the week before on vacation with my two best friends, and Saturday I had grand plans for myself, but I ended up spending most of the morning just getting caught up on work, and by the time I was done all that work, I just wanted to vacilar, all right? I didn't want to keep being disciplined. And what does vacilar mean? In Puerto Rico, it's defined as gozar, relajar, pasarla bien. Let's break down each one of these since they're defined in Spanish. Gozar, to enjoy. Relajar, different than relajarse. Okay, a verb being reflexive or not changes what it means. And this is a non-reflexive verb, relajar. If it's relajarse, reflexive, then it means to relax. Don't know what reflexive verbs are? Well, I happen to have a lesson, quite a few actually, live classes on reflexive verbs, what they are, when to use them, and how to use them right here in my Spanish resource library. Y'all get the point. We come back. Okay. So relajar, not reflexively in Puerto Rico, means to joke around. I actually kind of put it in a translation of like to bullshit. All right. To bullshit, to joke around, to enjoy, and pasarla bien is the translation, the correct translation for to have a good time. I can't tell you how many of my students want to translate directly tener, because that's to have, un buen tiempo. That's not how you say to have a good time. It's one of those that does not directly translate. So please learn this phrase. If you, while you're learning vacilar, if you don't know pasarla bien, you need to have that one, because how often are you going to say, we had a good time? I had a good time. Did you have a good time? It's a phrase that you need to have quick and that rolls off the tip of your tongue. So if you're struggling with conjugations as well, it will help you. It would help you to create a vocab card or example of it conjugated. Sí, la pasamos súper bien. We had a really good time. La pasamos, we're in pasamos nosotros. We need the la to go all the way at the beginning, okay? So when I'm saying that I just wanted to vacilar, what I meant was I wanted to kind of bullshit, have some fun, and enjoy for the rest of the afternoon. All right, this is something that I learned in the podcast, the word refrito. So this is, we were talking about going to a Mexican restaurant, and I asked him, you know, I know that in Puerto Rico, they don't use frijoles, they use habichuelas. But I wondered, so in referring to the Mexican dish, refried beans, would you use frijoles refritos, since we are using the word that's used in Mexico, and then refrito meaning refried? And Alfredo clarified that just saying refrito, you don't need to have any beans as part of the phrase, means refried beans. And in fact, this was always the case for me in the first, particularly year and a half, I would say, of being here on the island. Whenever I would learn a new word, I would end up seeing it or hearing it within 24 to 48 hours. Sin fallar. That was without fail. It would happen every single time. I mean, I would think, how long have I been missing this word? It's obviously everywhere because I've just learned it and then just seen it a bunch of times. And true again, as I had learned refrito in that last conversation that he and I had, and then was listening to another podcast where they were talking about different dips and a company that sells different dips and things like that. And they mentioned refrito. Refrito, this was a podcast from Puerto Rico. And of course, that was talking about refried beans there, refrito. So yes, indeed, refrito would be the way to say refried beans. I wanted to clarify something here because Alfredo, in that same conversation, that he was clarifying that, you know, in Puerto Rico se usa la palabra habichuelas, which starts with a silent H, habichuelas. He said you could refer to them as habichuelas, gandules, or he could say ensalada de granos. But I wanted to clarify that ensalada de granos is a particular dish. And here's what it looks like. I've got the picture up on the screen. It is a cold bean salad. So it has kidney beans, garbanzo beans, and black beans, typically made with onions, cilantro, peppers, and maybe an oil and vinaigrette. I'm not sure exactly what's on. I'm not a good cook, y'all, so I could not identify, but it's a nice, cold, fresh bean salad. And when he's saying ensalada de granos, he's referring specifically to this dish that you see here in the picture. All right, so those were the vocab words that came up in our conversation about the weekend. Let's move on to when we got into el tema de la conversación, de la parranda, right? Our sort of Puerto Rican form of Christmas caroling. I wanted to explain this phrase, valga la redundancia, because it holds within it a key to understanding some of Spanish sentence structure and phraseology. I think that's a word, sounds like it. Okay, valga la redundancia. This is defined in Spanish because it's very much a Spanish concept. Expresión usada por el hablante para excusar repetición de términos. So it's an expression used by the speaker to excuse repetition of terms. Hanish, that was Spanish and hates. My brain went faster than my mouth. My brain went faster than my mouth did. Spanish hates redundancy and will avoid it at all costs. This is why you cannot preguntar una pregunta. This is why you can't contar un cuento. Okay, we're seeing basically the same word in a different part of speech. We're seeing it as a verb and then a noun, a verb and a noun. Over again, preguntar una pregunta, contar un cuento. It's redundant. The word is basically the same twice, just again, with the exception of it being a different part of speech. Spanish will avoid this. You should not use a redundancy of terms. And if the speaker does so, they will excuse themselves by saying Valga la redundancia. Valga la redundancia. It's simply a term that's used to excuse the fact that they have been redundant in what they said. Okay, so you can't preguntar una pregunta. We're going to cross this out. Okay, you have to hacer una pregunta. Una pregunta. That literally translates to make a question, but what it translates to, not literally, is to ask a question. Okay? It has the feel of to ask a question because Spanish won't use the verb to ask next to the word a question because it's redundant. You have to do the same thing with contar un cuento. We cannot, yes, I just saw it, strike through. We cannot contar un cuento. We have to hacer un cuento, okay, to tell a story. Spanish will avoid using the same word twice, so they're going to switch it up and use the verb hacer. Hacer. Let's learn one while we're here. Hacer para hacerte el cuento largo corto. Para hacerte el cuento largo corto. Any guesses? To make a long story short. Okay, and we're doing that for you. Right? To make a long story short for you, right? Spanish tends to use more of these indirect and direct object pronouns than we do. If you're saying, what the heck is indirect and direct object pronoun? Ya tú sabes, head to my resource section and you'll learn all about them. All right, that's a fun one to have. Para hacerte el cuento largo corto, to make a long story short for you. All right, that was coming from Valga la redundancia and the hacerte un cuento. Now, you will hear him say this if ever he has to use or something like jugaron el juego, and he would say valga la redundancia afterwards to excuse his repetition of terms. Okay, let's talk about la tuna. So I had joked with students about how tuna, when you pronounce it kind of in a Spanish accent, sounds like it should just be tuna fish. We should be able to get away with that. Tuna and the tuna fish in Spanish is atún. You just put the A in front of the T, and then you put an accent mark over the U, atún. And the reason why it really doesn't work to just throw a little Spanish accent on tuna and hope that it means tuna fish is because tuna is a phrase that's already taken in Spanish, and it does not mean the fish. It's actually a musical group. Okay, una agrupación o hermandad de estudiantes universitarios o miembro de una sociedad que, portando la vestimenta antigua de la universidad o vestimenta que represente su cultura de origen, se caracterizan por cantar, tocar y viajar por el mundo gracias a estas habilidades. Okay, so una agrupación o hermandad de estudiante, a group or kind of a brotherhood, a fraternity of university students or members of a society that wear kind of their traditional garb. The vestimenta can be dress code, outfit, costume, and here antigua, referring to their, like I said, I would say traditional garb from the university or an outfit, a costume that represents their culture of origin. Okay, they're characterized by singing, playing instruments, traveling around the world thanks to these abilities. So La Tuna is a musical group, especially, at least from my knowledge, especially prevalent in the Christmas season. They start to practice more around that time. They have more events where they're performing in the Christmas season. Okay, so La Tuna, although we'd like it to be tuna fish, is actually a musical group. And this stems from, as Alfredo mentioned in the episode, this comes from Spain, this tradition. Vamos, seguimos. And speaking of music, I wanted to just share a visual of some of the instruments that Alfredo mentioned in the that are part of La Parranda. Okay, so el guiro, that's what we see here in the top left, this gourd-like looking instrument that has ridges, and you play it with that fork, like comb looking thing, right? It has the sound of typically played like that. That's el guiro, okay? It was the best I could do as far as my representation here. Las maracas, I think we know what maracas are, right? Down here in the bottom left, you have el cuatro puertorriqueño. I have not held a cuatro. I haven't had one up close to me, so I can't speak too much for it, but this was a picture I found of un cuatro puertorriqueño. You'll see here in the image, it looks like it's a double-stringed instrument, almost like a mandolin. I've heard it compared also to a ukulele. It might have a slightly higher pitch sound than a guitar would. Yes, a guitarra is also a classic instrument in La Parranda, but I didn't include a picture because I think we know what a guitarra is, and a guitar, right? Finally, we have los panderos, which are the three drums that are used. Alfredo mentioned these three, the biggest one being el bajo, the bass, el seguidor is the medium-sized one, the one that goes boom, 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 boom. And the requinto is the one that has the most kind of syncopated rhythm and is the highest pitch of the three. That's the one that Alfredo plays. Okay, seguimos. A couple more words that came up in the context of La Parranda. He talked about los tambores when I was asking him to explain what the panderos were. He described them as tambores. I wanted to make sure that you know those are drums. El tambor, los tambores. I just love that he used this word because I just really enjoy that this word is used for what it's used for. Pegajoso, an adjective that actually comes from the verb pegar, which means to stick, right? It can also mean to hit in some contexts, but usually sticky, okay? To stick, and pegajoso makes it the adjective sticky. So you would use this for glue, which is actually called pega, la pega, okay? P-E-G-A. Or honey, maple syrup is pegajoso, pegajoso. This is used to describe also songs, or the way Alfredo used it for el ritmo pegajoso. Okay, he used it in masculine there because he was describing el ritmo, which is masculine. It's a catchy rhythm. It's a sticky. I kind of like translating it as sticky, as in it sticks to you. It's kind of contagious, right? It makes you dance. And you'll often hear this word in feminine, this adjective in feminine, because people here will use it to describe a song. Una canción bastante pegajosa. It's really a catchy song, sticky. You could think of it if you like that sort of imagery of it being stuck to you, as I enjoy. Okay, so pegajoso, when used in this context of music, is what we would translate to catchy, or maybe it gets stuck in your head. Know that this also means sticky. Okay, el aguinaldo. This is not a word that I've used very often in my vocab, but good to have it. A fancy word, means Christmas carol. I've also seen it translated as a Christmas bonus. But I think here, mainly I hear el bono. El bono, sí, is for bonus. Okay, aguinaldo. Alfredo saying that, referring it to Christmas, or comparing La Parranda to Christmas caroling in the States. All right, we've got, excuse me, el espíritu navideño, el espíritu navideño. This means Christmas spirit, el espíritu navideño. And what I wanted to point out here, that using Christmas in this way makes it an adjective. So if I was going to call it Christmas food, it would be comida navideña, right? We'd have to change it to feminine there because we were describing comida, which is feminine. If we were talking about canciones, right, Christmas songs, how would we have to change navideño? Las canciones navideñas, right? It has to be feminine and plural. And finally, I wanted to share this phrase. It's great to have phrases that don't translate necessarily word for word, but are definitely things you'll use by word of mouth, or from sort of implying like oral tradition was the context that we were talking about, as far as some of these songs that are really, really old and you can't find lyrics for them if you Google it, etc. It doesn't come up, but they're ones that are passed down kind of from generation to generation, but by word of mouth is the other use for this phrase. So de boca en boca, to imply by word of mouth, a great phrase to have. All right, moving on to some of the pronunciation aspects that you're going to hear in the episode. I wanted to first admit that I actually originally wrote this when I was writing down I was creating this PowerPoint. I wrote pal de palitos o tragos, changing the R to L. If you're very, very new to listening to Puerto Rican Spanish, then this might be a new phenomenon to you. This happens in the Caribbean, and it's called landecismo, is the linguistic term for this phenomenon that happens in pronunciation, where the R will turn into an L. This does not happen with every R. It will happen to R's that are at the end of the word, like pal, par, or hablar, hablar. Bailar, bailar, vacilar, having an L sound at the end of when an R is at the end of the word, or it'll happen when an R is before a consonant. Otherwise, you will not see this. They won't change the word será into será. That will not happen. It would be an R before a consonant, like porque, porque. Okay, there's an L sound instead of a porque. Let's see, what else could we think of? Hermano, where the R in hermano would turn into an L sound. A number of reasons why people think this may have happened. Some pronunciations originating in Spain and the people that settled in the Caribbean, bringing that over, as well as the slave trade that went through the Caribbean, and that it was hard for Africans to produce the rolled R sound. So that this might have come from that, their interpretation, which is you do have to lift your tongue up, but if you don't have any air behind it, it'll become an L sound. Okay, you have to lift it up and blow out, exhale out in order for it to become a rolled R. So they had the right sort of feel, but maybe not enough air to back it up and cause the vibration that makes a rolled R sound. So this sort of L sound is what was produced. Okay. Pal, typically, if you see it like this in Puerto Rico, and you might even see an apostrophe there, would be the contraction of the words para, el. Remember that one of the uses of para is to imply destination. Okay, so if you're using using para to imply to, and then whatever you're following with as in I'm going to the gym, you would hear pal, voy pal gym. Okay, that's going to be para and el, to the, put together, pal. You know that in Puerto Rico, in the Caribbean, this happens incluso in Venezuela, Colombia, that they'll drop the second syllable of para, and it'll sound like pa, okay? Don't complain, we do this all the time. We don't say let me know, we say let me, or gonna. We don't say going to, because we're not that much into over-enunciating in our native language. Another example is vamos pa Disney, vamos pa Disney. So vamos pa Disney, we're going to Disney. Here I'm not using pal because I don't say we're going to the Disney. Vamos pa Disney. Alrighty, and another one that I have to share with you guys that I really just need Alfredo to help me with this one. All right, let me go ahead and pull up this episode. I want to open it with media player. Okay, this is a phenomenon that's referred to in Puerto Rico as arrastrar la R. And arrastrar la R literally means to drag the R. What this means, now we're talking about the rolled R sound. So the R to L happens when the R is at the end of the word or when the R is before a consonant. The la R arrastrada, the dragged R sound, happens with a rolled R. And what does it sound like? It sounds like kind of an H that might have a little bit more contraction behind it than just a sound. I feel like it's got a little bit more to it than just an H. I'm not the greatest at producing this sound. That's why I'm just going to have you listen to Alfredo. He does it twice in the span of about 5 to 10 seconds. So you'll hear him do this. This is something that you will hear throughout the island, probably with the exception of the San Juan area, okay? But you will find it in El Sur, in Ponce, where we live. I would say 90% of the people that I know arrastran la R, okay? They drag the R. To be found in El Campo, you know, and sort of in the interior of Puerto Rico. You can find it all over. Okay, let's listen to Alfredo do this. He's going to, both times it'll be with the word parranda, which when the R is arrastrada, dragged, it'll sound like pajanda. Let's listen to him help us hear this pronunciation.
Se llama, mira, te vamos a hacer una pajandita tal día.
Una pajandita tal día, una pajandita.
Pero también para sorprender tal vez a alguien de la casa. Entonces, vamos a hacer tal día esta pajanda.
Exacto. Tal día esta pajanda. There it was again. I'm not laughing at this phenomenon of pronunciation. I'm laughing at the fact that I know I don't nail it when I try to reproduce it, okay? Sometimes it comes out when an R is at the beginning of the word for me, like rápido, because I've heard that, y el rápido, or que rico. Alfredo's best friend's name is Happy. I've never once heard him be called Rafi. It's Happy. So in those cases where I've heard it a lot, then it might come out. But generally, I don't trust myself to be the best example of this pronunciation. pronunciation, so you can hear it from the man himself. Alfredo, okay? It will be hard for your brain to recognize this sound as two R's for a while, but you'll adjust. I definitely had issues hearing this as R's, but just time and repetition of that particular example, and your brain adapts. Okay? The brain's always learning. All right, friends, getting into our last section of today, which is our grammar part. I'm going to start with a beginner intermediate example of grammar that I wanted to point out, which is right around this section that I just shared with you. You're going to find the phrase sin avisar. Sin avisar means without notice, without notifying, without letting somebody know. Okay, sin means without, avisar means to notify or to let someone, is the implication, to let someone know. So sin avisar put together is like without letting them know. It used to be that the parrandas happened sin avisar. You would just show up to someone's house and start playing. Okay, that he was mentioning, now it's a little bit more planned. Okay, what I want to point out here, the difference grammatically between English and Spanish. In English, always after without, we use an ing ending to our verb. Listen, it's a couple examples. Without knowing, right? With the way I translated sin avisar, without letting them know, letting, without knowing, without having talked about it, without seeing for herself. That is the way we structure a verb after the preposition without. It's always in an ing. And most people, because their English brain gives them the structure, tries to put an ing after the word sin in Spanish, but it doesn't work like that. Spanish doesn't use ings after the word or after the preposition sin, okay? You're just going to keep the verb in the infinitive. That means keep it with its AR, ER, or IR ending. So without knowing would sound like sin. What's the verb for to know? Saber. Sin saber is how you say without knowing. Don't make it sabiendo, right? For those who know how to make the ing ending, it's not sabiendo. It's not sin avisando. It's not sin avisar. Keep the AR ending. Keep it in its infinitive. If you don't know what the infinitive is, go back to that Grammar 101 class. It's going to help you a lot. Okay. After the verb sin, keep the verb in the infinitive. Don't touch it. Sin saber, sin haberlo hablado would be without having talked about it. Sin verlo, por sí misma, por ella misma, or some examples of that. Some of these structures, like structuring without having talked about it, is not a beginner intermediate. That's a tough one because you have to use this, the present perfect, having talked about it. Okay, just know that after sin, keep the verb in the infinitive. Next example. Intermediate grammar. Ir in the imperfect tense needs to be your best friend. I don't think that when people are learning the imperfect tense that they really latch on to how much you are going to need the conjugations. Iba, ibas, iba, ibamos, and iban, okay? And I'm talking about, because this can translate to was going to, and this is where you need it the most. Was going to, were going to. I was going to, he was going to, we were going to, they were going to, you were going to. Okay, you will need this so often. Think about just the fact of saying, what was I going to say? What was I saying? What was I going to say? We were going to do this, but then this happened, right? This is something you'll use all the time because we have plans that don't always end up working out as we plan. So you would use was going to express that. You need to have this be something that's readily available and easy for you to construct. The idea of was going to is wrapped up in iba. Let's look at a couple examples that came up in the podcast. Again, talking about the grand plans that I had for my Saturday. Porque yo iba a ir al gym. I was going to go to the gym. Pero había trabajado toda la mañana. I had worked all morning and I was over it by that point, okay? Yo iba a ir al gym. I was going to go, but often followed by a pero, okay? Again, here, íbamos a pedir. This is when we went out to the Mexican restaurant. We were just going to get an appetizer there and then get a pizza because we were going to go watch the football game. Notice how many times I said we were going to. We were just going to get, that would be íbamos, a appetizer because we were going to get a pizza, íbamos, again, because we were going to watch a game. Íbamos a ver. And that would be íbamos 3 times used, okay? Íbamos a pedir. We were going to order. just the appetizer. We ordered an appetizer, didn't realize that it came with a half a pound of bread and a friggin' pound of cheese. So let's scratch the pizza plan because we essentially just ate one. All right, and there's one more thing that I want to point out. We just talked about in the beginning of the episode, darse, under the context of a drink. But a drink would be like to have, just saying, we had a couple drinks, I had a couple beers, I had a drink, we had some drinks there, the examples that I have on the screen. Okay, darse, in the context of an event, evento, is meaning it happened. That has a ton of meanings, friends, and instead of racking your brain, it's just easy to learn them in their different contexts. Know that darse, when I'm referring to an event or some project or something that you wanted to do, means it happened, or it didn't happen if you said no se dio, okay? So in this context, I first said no se dieron. I was talking about the La Sanse, the Las Fiestas de la Calle San Sebastián, right? The street festival that happens in Old San Juan. Excuse me. No se dieron. They didn't happen. They didn't happen the past 2 years. Just think of it as that. No se dieron. They didn't happen. It's kind of like the most casual way to say it, more casual than ocurrir. Oh, another option for that, right? No se dieron. They didn't happen the past 2 years because of the pandemic. And then Alfredo, right afterwards, used it in another way. Las anteriores se habían dado. He was saying, si no me equivoco, las anteriores se habían dado. So that meaning the ones before had happened. We're seeing it in this past perfect tense here, which forms had happened, had done, had thought, had worked, whatever. You're using had with another verb. They had happened, and there was some criticism about it. This was because of the huge earthquake that happened January 6th or 7th. I'm not 100% sure on the date in 2020, right before the pandemic came and shut down everything in March. In January, there was a big earthquake that shook the whole island. The epicenter is outside of Guanica, but this one was, I think, about a 6 point something and was felt island-wide. Everyone was woken up by this earthquake very early in the morning. All right, and that had happened January 6th, 7th, around there. And then the La Sanse happened maybe the weekend after, 2 weekends after. And obviously people were worried about replicas and their safety. So he was bringing up that year of before the pandemic started, that they had happened and there was some criticism. Hubo cierta crítica, he said, because of it was post-earthquake. All right, so iba and darse in the context of an event or something happening. Finally, we've got se supone que. This is advanced grammar, okay? If you are wouldn't put yourself into the advanced grammar level, then it might be helpful to not listen to this part so that you don't get overwhelmed and confused. Se supone que. Okay, se supone que is how you would structure supposed to. The problem with this is that it's not the way your English brain is going to want to construct it at all, because we always put a subject with supposed to. Examples: they were supposed to, we were supposed to, I was supposed to. Spanish doesn't do it like this, or at least that's not how it's generally set up here in Puerto Rico, okay? You use an impersonal kind of expression. Basically, you could imagine it as translating to, it was supposed to be that, and then you would put in who was supposed to do what. It was supposed to be that they got here at this time. It was supposed to be that I left that day. It was supposed to be, that feels weird, and know that you can just translate it as I was supposed to leave, right? But in order for you to help get more familiar with constructing this, it might help to think about it, valga la redundancia, right? In order for you to help, it might help to think about it as it was supposed to be that I was leaving this day. It was supposed to be that they were going to get here at this time, okay? So let's look at it in two examples of the past. This is where it came up in the podcast. Se supone que iba a ir a trabajar is what Alfredo said. Se supone que iba a ir a trabajar is I was supposed to go to work, or it was supposed to be that I was going to go to work. I was supposed to go to work, okay? Iba a ir a trabajar. This was when he was going to do overtime on a Saturday. Se supone que, I want to give you another example. This didn't come up in the podcast, but I want you to see it one more way in the past tense. This is the way I use it after Huracán Fiona. Se supone que me iba el mismo sábado. Se supone que me iba el mismo sábado. So I was supposed to go that very Saturday, that same Saturday of the storm. That's what el mismo is giving it. That very Saturday that Fiona was coming. I had already had my tickets since April or so because my sister was getting married in early October, and I was supposed to be se supone que ayudaba or ayudara, they use past subjunctive as well, a mis padres a preparar para la mudanza, to help them get prepared for a move. Okay, so here you're seeing it set up in past tense. Both of these examples are using I was supposed to go. So here we're seeing iba. All right, now typically when this is in the present tense, so we're getting out of I was supposed to go, or yeah, that's what both of these are. You're getting into they are supposed to, or we are supposed to, or I'm supposed to, or something. So we still need the se supone que, and afterwards, I always, in Puerto Rico, in fact, I've gotten corrected when I've not used the present subjunctive. After se supone que in present tense, you use the present subjunctive. Se supone que estén abiertos. Se supone que estén abiertos is they're supposed to be open. Se supone que lleguen a las 10, and they're supposed to get here at 10. Okay, we're talking about not something that's happening in the present tense, something that's happened, I'm sorry, not something that's happening in the past or was supposed to happen in the past, but something that should be happening today or shortly in the future. We're going to be using subjunctive for those. Okay, again, if you at this point you're put yourself in the advanced grammar, you should know about the subjunctive. It doesn't mean that you necessarily have mastered it at this point. Again, I have a live class on that, and even ways for you to practice forming the subjunctive there in my Spanish resource section. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening. I'd love to hear feedback on today's episode, things that would be helpful in the future, breakdowns, etc. Would love to hear your feedback. So follow me on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at KerryB, KerryBE _. Feel free to comment and let me know your thoughts. Thanks so much y nos vemos en la próxima.